Morning, Christian.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair.
Morning, Commissioner. Morning, Christian.
Morning.
I'm very excited, Chair, because you can hear me. And I was on a Council of Governments meeting where I couldn't get my audio to be heard by anybody.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to have a board meeting where we couldn't hear you, Commissioner.
The thing is that I would take offense to that, but I know that you're sometimes sarcastic.
Sometimes.
I did a lot of typing into the chat. I will just say that.
Where are you? It looks like you're
I'm in a backyard now.
Oh, okay. All righty.
It's very beautiful out today, as you know.
Well, yes, it's going to be a gorgeous day. All right. Good
morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. Morning,
Morning,
Ken. All right. Looks like everybody is present and accounted for. We'll go ahead and oh, oops. What did I just do? Here we go. We'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and start the meeting. Call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for September 23rd, 2021. And Commissioner Burschauer, would you mind leading us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all. Okay. So let's take a look at our calendar session. Do we have anything to add to our joint calendar, commissioners? I don't see anything.
Chair, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
I did want to note that it is coming up, but we're still a few weeks away from our District 6 meeting, which you will be chairing. And before that, public or natural resources.
Yeah, we've got a number of things coming up. Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move on to public comment, and any comments we receive via email. So thank you, Carolina Rook, for getting those to us. And thank you, Carrie Hinton, for getting us online today. Our work session is the much anticipated continuation of our discussion on the distribution of the ARPA funds. And I want to thank Ken Huffer, our administrator, for the work that he has done in moving along the preliminary plan that the commissioners put forward. So thank you for that, Ken. And let's take a look at what we have so far. Thank you for the information that we received this morning. And maybe we can go ahead and take a look at the basically what we have set up in terms of the grant programs for each of those categories.
And then if I may, so again, I just apologize. I was able to get the materials to you this morning, and we'll make sure we upload those into the packet with the draft documents that we were able to pull together and present for this morning's work session. And then I'm also keeping an eye out, and Carrie Hinton, if Carrie Martin joins, I was also hoping to have her join the discussion as well, because she was instrumental and did a lot of work in helping pull these together. So again, what you have before you, what I emailed this morning is, well, maybe before I jump into those, and my apologies if I'm jumping around a little bit. Maybe it's because I was out yesterday, so I'm a little scattered this morning. But the first part that I wanted to talk about is, as part of the ARPA, is just a quick update. We released a request for information, an RFI, on the rural broadband infrastructure. And so we did go through the timelines. We did extend the timeline on one occasion, but we did receive 4 responses to that request for information. Right now, the next step would be is scheduling a session or how to get the responses before the board to see what was provided. The reason there was a little bit of a delay, and we're not really haven't figured out process yet, there was at least one of the submissions highlighted that there may be some trade industry secrets or concerns with the information that they provided. So we're currently working with county council to review the statute and come up with a way on how we can take the responses and have a discussion on next steps with that. But again, we received 4 responses to the RFI. And so we'll work on getting that information ready to go to have that discussion. So I just wanted to give a quick update on the broadband, and then now switching gears to this morning, what I sent to the board. Again, it really breaks down. It was 3 of the areas that were identified under ARPA as potential grants or funding, which included the water and sewer infrastructure, the child care, and investments for nonprofit organizations. That was more of a general COVID category. So we have those 3 proposals on what a solicitation process would look like under each category, and hopefully we'd be happy to, depending on what the board would like to do as a format, we could either tackle them one at a time and have some discussions, or if you've had enough time to provide some feedback to staff, and depending on if there's consensus to make certain improvements or changes to each category, we can do that as well.
Commissioner Kula. Thank you, Ken.
We just have a suggestion, Chair, and thank you, Ken. Since I was in a meeting when it came in and up until the start of our meeting now, would it be possible to screen share it and then just do would that be helpful to other commissioners to screen share and kind of scroll? Okay, I mean, I know the basic contents, but it would be helpful to me. And then I would be happy to then engage in discussion about it.
Yes, and Ken, probably a good idea would be to tackle each category at one, just do that one, and then we can move on to the next one. If it's possible to screen share it, we could probably go with the, just move on to the second page of, let's just say we start with water and sewer infrastructure, and just go with the second page, because the first page is pretty much just an explanation.
Okay, I'm going to try.
Or the bottom of the
I
first
can see it.
page. Yeah, it doesn't. The bottom of the first page basically talks about that the primary use of those water projects would be. So that would be a good place for us to start, just to get up to speed on what these would entail. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, and I can't really see. I'm not sure if everyone can see.
We can see.
I can see. Yeah.
That's good.
So you can see that underneath, starting with the water projects, to assist communities in infrastructure capital improvements, you can see that whole write-up. Okay.
Yes.
So, and there's Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Hi there.
So-
We just had a little technical issue.
All right. So as you can see, again, we were basing this both on a review of the Treasury guidance and then also discussions, previous work session discussions with the board. So, so again, looking at the types of eligible projects, again, with the water and sewer infrastructure, treatment, transmission, distribution, source, storage, consolidation, creation of new systems is what we had. You can see the list of water security, efficiency, capital projects, and planning. We did put, I know that a lot of the emphasis in previous discussions is really making those infrastructure investments. But we do, we included planning. It is something that's in there. So if there's a jurisdiction that has needs but hasn't developed a plan, we still wanted to have the ability for jurisdictions to make an application, even if it's for planning. Carrie, did you have anything you wanted to add now that you've joined, kind of going through the water and sewer?
Just that with this application or this program and the other two that you'll see in the packet, that these were aligned specifically with language that was provided in the interim final rule by Treasury. So, the idea is that it is very clear that this matches up with the Treasury guidelines, so we don't have any confusion about eligible projects and how we receive full approval for those in the reporting process.
Commissioner Kula.
Yes, I was going to chair. I have a question. Thank you, Ken. I know it's hard for us to see all of them. One question then that I think Carrie may have just answered was the italicized rehabilitation of dams and reservoirs are ineligible expenses. Is that related to Treasury guidance?
That is, it is, yes.
Okay, because I know that at least Palmer Creek Water District and the city of Yamhill had expressed interest in those kinds of projects. So that's really good to know. Thank you.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that anything that's ancillary to that project couldn't be covered, and then they would be able to, well, they couldn't use their ARPA funds to cover it, but they could use some other funds to cover it, I would imagine.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, these are, the thing that we tried to get across is that this is for discrete projects. So we're not interested in people submitting, we have a $100 million project. Well, that $100 million project is comprised of many phased smaller projects. And so we're looking for applications for discrete phases of a project.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I would add that, because based on the requirements from the Treasury on when the funds have to be fully expended, without specifically saying they need to be shovel ready, but keeping in mind that some of these projects, some of these large capital projects, depending on where they're at in the planning and application process for permitting and so on, the clock is ticking to get the funds awarded for projects, and the projects will need to be completed. Not, a lot of times you'll hear, well, as long as the funds are obligated. The Treasury guidance was very clear that funds have to be fully expended, and the date's not at the top of my head, but I want to say by 2026. Does that sound right, Carrie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ken, it says here on all of them, unless I'm mistaken, that the projects need to be completed within 18 months of the contract start date. Now, I know that a lot of the projects that are we've gotten some emails about are never going to be completed in 18 months. And I'm wondering, does that necessarily make them ineligible when some of these are just, if I'm just looking at the Housing Authority project, the Stratus project, for instance, that's not something that can be completed within 18 months. Yet, I would hate to see them not be eligible.
So they would not have to have an entire project. So for instance, if one of the cities were to apply for a larger water and sewer program, the piece of the project that they receive money for needs to be completed within 18 months, but the entire water sewer project does not need to be completed. So it would just be isolated to that funded portion.
I would say, as an example, if a jurisdiction was planning, or needing to add a new reservoir or something along those lines, and this was being used, the funding would be used for the planning portion of that, that we would want the planning portion of it done within the 18 months to ensure that we have the that we're meeting the timelines for expending the funds that we have, but then it also gives us time to collect all the needed reports and data necessary to then do the follow-up with the U.S. Treasury to report on the compliance with the regulations and how the funds were spent.
And as far as compliance goes, to what degree are we then responsible for ascertaining compliance as opposed to the jurisdiction? And is it up to them to do the reporting or us?
Well, what I'm envisioning, what we would look at would be like many other grant funds. This is the county's ARPA allocation, so we're ultimately responsible for making the reports to U.S. Treasury on how we use the funds. What I envision is anybody awarded funds for a specific project, we would enter into agreements with those jurisdictions to make sure that there's reporting requirements, because we're not going to oversee a water line project in Amity, as an example. We're not going to oversee the project. It's going to be, it's going to be the responsibility of the jurisdiction to oversee the project, apply the use of those funds, and then make the reports to the county that then we can take those reports and build it into our reports to the U.S. Treasury. So all that would be built into agreements prior to releasing of any of the funds. And then it would be our responsibility to then provide the oversight to the jurisdictions to make sure that they're complying with the reporting requirements and that agreement, that sub-agreement that we would enter into with that jurisdiction on how they use the funds.
Do we get to carve any of this out for administration? And would we be able to consider even contracting some of this out? Because it seems like an awful lot of work for us to then be involved in the process of vetting these and reporting on these in terms of what Treasury is asking for. I certainly wouldn't expect a staff, or at least our administrator, to have to be doing the heavy lifting on this.
I think there are provisions in the language as far as some administrative costs in administering these funds, and it's something that we could explore and look at, and whether we apply it to the entire ARPA allocation, some type of a structure to ensure that we're capturing for some of those costs, or we could even get it down into the program level element that we make sure that we set aside a certain amount for agreement and contract administration for within each various program. So I think there's a couple ways, and I don't have the language right in front of me on the administrative limitations, but I can keep an eye on that, and we can look at that and come back and talk to the board if I have a recommendation on how we approach that and what the percentage might look like, and make sure that we're compliant with Treasury guidelines.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I have a number of questions, but really I think the next one would be, it'll be defined clearly for applicants what an implementation project is versus a capital project, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, an implementation would be something that includes labor, whereas a capital could just be a capital expenditure. Maybe you're just buying equipment with this portion, and then you're building in the labor and installation costs later.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yep, and it would be defined on the application, so they could choose from like a drop-down menu.
A question, I'm not seeing it here, but as far as vetting the applications, I saw what we're doing with the childcare portion, but who will be reviewing the applications for the infrastructure projects?
Well, and I think that's part of the discussion, on what the board would like to see as far as process goes, specifically for water and sewer infrastructure. We didn't necessarily get into the process on how applications are vetted. Typically for something like this, first there would be, a staff review to make sure that all the boxes are checked on the application process. And then what the board would like to see for a review, is there do we need to stand up a review committee, for determining recommendations to eventually come to the board. And then again, before any funds are awarded, or any announcements are made, the board would be making a decision on those award amounts and who's getting the funds, would have the ultimate approval on it.
If you scroll down to the bottom of page 3, it says selection criteria that the grants would be awarded on a competitive basis and scored and evaluated by a committee approved by the board.
Yep, thank you. I didn't scroll.
So that whether, once the board decided the criteria for this selection committee, if this were going to be comprised of a local jurisdiction, if it were just community members, however you wanted to comprise that.
Okay, I think maybe we could be looking ahead to that, because this process has taken so long, and I think whenever you get government involved, by necessity, there are just so many different boxes to check in order to be in compliance for the federal government, and then we've got to address these locally. So I would love to be thinking in terms of specifics, people who are specific to the industry or specific to infrastructure projects, and someone who has some knowledge of these types of projects, so they'd be able to weigh in, instead of us just putting together a group of local community people who might not really understand what that project would entail. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I'd really like to get as much of that done as we can, so we can, light a fire under this. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. Real quick, I would agree with pulling out a percentage of whatever these funds are to apply towards administration, or at least the reporting requirements that we have. I think that makes sense. I'm kind of going back to our original discussion about water and sewer, and some of the discussions that Commissioner Kula hosted. It was clear from some of the cities that these projects are critical for water delivery or treatment or so on and so forth. I'm just wondering, does this timeline work with some of those critical projects? Because I think that, our instinct was to fund things that are critical, that have the biggest bang for your buck. So for instance, like the Amity issue, would this work for that timeline? I want to make sure we're not boxing ourselves into the point where we're now only able to fund planning, right? Where we really wanted to fund, let's get the pipes fixed and make sure people have water, that kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Commissioner Kula. Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I feel like I should call you vice chair. I should be in the habit of that, Commissioner Bershauer, but I think that, okay. The timeline works for the city of Amity and for the city of Yamhill as it's presented or proposed here for their projects, because they're realistically looking at spring, summer, and fall of next year for doing these projects. It still leaves the city of Yamhill in a tight spot for some of them, but some of them will be fast enough, depending upon the things that are presented to us. They could be really fast and get something right away, or longer term, but still in the right time frame. And to that end, it's one of the thoughts I had was, if we can, one proposal, I guess, of doing that vetting is, we do as Carrie or Ken suggested, the staff initial review that says, okay, yeah, this is something that it is eligible. And then perhaps using some of the administrative dollars, as Commissioner Bershauer suggested, sending this to review at Council of Governments, or even through AOC staff, where we have folks who know water and sewer systems at the regional level, but don't have an interest. Well, that sounds funny. We all have an interest in water and sewer, but who don't have that personal interest in the community, because I think it would be really hard to put together a panel of experts when we're looking at water and sewer municipal systems, because by its nature, it's going to have people who have a stake in it. So that's one way of doing it, is having them look at it and being like, yes, these are all things that we know are important and doable, eligible. And then it comes before us. So we get these two levels of outside of the Board of Commissioners assessment before we give thumbs up or thumbs down.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. Give me some specifics about who at AOC, what staff or how you're thinking they might weigh in.
Well, my first thought was Council of Governments, because they have planning staff who work with cities on water and sewer infrastructure and development, like Renata Wakely is an immediate example. And she's done a lot of work in the canyon, specifically with helping them plan their water and sewer systems as they rebuild. At AOC, I guess the person who would come to mind more readily than others would be like Mallory Roberts, but there's plenty of staff who have a knowledge of natural resource and infrastructure needs there. And I'm obviously welcome to suggestions. COG was the first one that came to mind, but I feel like having somebody from AOC who's seeing that big scale perspective across the state could be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think COG is definitely a good fit for this in that they do this work all the time. And you're right, we need to take it out of the community, because it's going to be tough to pick and choose when your neighbors are having critical water needs and you're out. So appreciate that. Commissioner Bershauer.
I was trying to scroll up and down and I realized it's not my screen. So if we approve this structure, are we saying that we agree to capping the award on any sort of infrastructure type of grant to $1 million? Is that what that said? I can't see what it said, but.
Yeah, those are the threshold suggestions, but you could certainly modify any of those levels. I did want to say, when we put together these 3 documents, we did review all of the applications or unsolicited proposals that we received in each of the subject areas, so that we could make sure that this would fit that criteria. And then also the 18 months is a general guideline, but remember, the board would always have the option to grant an extension if there was a particular project that needed a few more months. We just would be making sure it doesn't go to the last minute, so that we don't have that flexibility. We could certainly grant project extensions.
Okay, so I think Amity fell below the $1 million threshold, but let's say Yamhill doesn't and they exceed that. I just want to be clear that perhaps these parameters are getting us to a point where we might not be able to fully fund something, right? So Amity or Yamhill might have to go chase more money. And we had talked a little bit about that as a board, that we want to make sure that we're not just sort of, filling the bucket 20% and then the project can't get done. So thoughts on that in terms of our previous discussion?
I'm wondering if, because I know we've all had questions whenever we've been contacted asking, how much are you going to, or are you going to fund this project? Because they have their own ARPA funds. And so that's going to be a determinant too. And I don't think they can make any plans until they see what we're going to contribute to this. So this is a difficult thing, but you're right. We don't want to be just broadcasting money and none of it is effective, because we're not giving anyone enough to actually get something done. But I do think if we can look at these in terms of these just being guidelines, I think that might be a first step. Commissioner Kula?
Yeah, I think that your last comment about as a guideline but not a hard is good. In talking, I sat down with the City of Yamhill leadership and Jody Christensen to kind of talk about what funding is available to the state and how do they access that, right? The conversation made it sound like if we, if the city has their money, say that's from SDCs, because some of these projects will be SDC eligible, and so they've got to fund. and that can be used as match, or if they've got their federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan, they can build those up, and then they can take ours and they can go to the state and say, look, this is what we have, this is what we have. Now finish us off. That was it sounded like that was a potentially very good strategy, especially if the work was something that was part of one of their master plans. And some of these, I guess, are not part of their master plans, but they're part of a bigger project, say the ODOT one, where it's clear that this is a necessary thing that's happening. So I feel comfortable with saying, here's $1 million for a project. And then as chair, you pointed out, million-ish would be a way to say it, but that this is the range. And if you have something that goes over that, but you absolutely need to do it and you can't find funding otherwise, we will think about it, consider it.
I agree with that. And also I know that there are several projects in the works where the state is looking to see, has there been any local match, any local interest, any local contribution? And that would get them over take it across the finish line. So I know there are a couple of those in the hopper, and we'd hate to see those fail because we didn't provide enough funding.
Well, and I think one of the challenges that we had for rolling out funds or a program like this, again, is ultimately what the board would like to see, because knowing how expensive water and sewer infrastructure type projects can be, and we've identified, $6.8 million to help support those projects. Depends on, are we looking, does the board want to fully fund a single project, or would you rather partially fund or contribute funds towards, 7 or 8 projects, because then otherwise you get into the vetting and prioritization on which communities' water system needs maybe more than the other, that you start to have that challenge. And so then that's another thing that it helps having kind of, suggested ranges or caps to award amounts, that it allows you to fund, not necessarily having to pick an Amity project over a Yamhill project, but you're able to provide some support for both of the projects, as an example.
Yes, I agree. But I think ultimately, for me at least, I think what I would be really interested in making sure that the urgency of the project rises to the top of the priority list. And if it means that we can't fund a smaller project, I'd love to be able to say that we're going to just, we've got two cities in this county that have some critical needs. Others have needs as well. But that's what I'm just thinking about. Amity and Yamhill rise to the top of that.
Sure.
Chair. Oh,
So
Carrie.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Carrie. All
Okay. I was just going to say that, to your point, this would be a first step, but then in developing the actual online application, there would be a process of determining prioritization and need, so that it allows the selection committee to make those determinations. So based on this first step, then this allows me to create an application that mirrors this, and also allows the committee to evaluate based on what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula?
I was going to say that it would be good to have an urgency measurement in the application. So that's really what I was thinking about. I do know that at least for the city of Yamhill, their cost estimate for a pipeline, for example, a transmission line, is about $3 million. That's not something we have to pay all of, and $1 million would be a really good way of getting it forward. But they also have other projects that are going to cost less that we could do fully funding. So it seems like there's some flexibility, except perhaps in the Amity pipe situation.
Agreed. So as far as the application goes, Carrie, do you see anything that we need to add to it that would get us to expressing the urgency, and also making it clear? Well, it's already made clear that there needs to be some local government input.
Yeah, this isn't the application. So this is just
Right.
this is the guidelines. So we would definitely create a mechanism for applicants to identify the level of urgency and the critical need. So so I would look at other examples of how we might get at that information.
And I'm looking, yes, and to your point, I'm looking at the eligibility that, or rather the match segment here, where they need to pledge a one-on-one or 25% of the fund. So that's made clear.
I
Okay.
would say though, to your conversation about, you know, the 1 million-ish, if you feel like you want to fund a project that is over $1 million, then let's bump those caps now, because these are the things that would be used to pre-qualify applications. And so it becomes an easier process. Otherwise, we could create a separate process where maybe you can only apply for up to $1 million, but if you still have a $500,000 need, you know, do you want them to come back to the board with a separate request? I mean, we just want to create a process that will fit as many different applicants.
Yeah, that's important, because we can't really be vague on the application on the requirements, and then when people come in, we're picking and choosing, and that becomes really difficult to do. So okay, so do we have any more discussion on this particular, the water and sewer infrastructure, and is staff have a pretty good idea of what the application would need to include? Ken?
Go ahead. I think Commissioner Burschauer was going to say something.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say, are we in agreement that we should bump that implementation number up at this point?
Chair,
And
I was going to recommend 1.5 million up to 1.5 million, but sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I was even thinking 2. That doesn't mean we have to award 2, but if we do anything under 2, you know, I think we change that now, as Carrie mentioned and suggested.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, I would be comfortable with 1.5.
Okay.
And then we're also looking at, again, remember that they've got ARPA funds as well.
Sure.
So the 1.5, and do we want to change anything on capital projects or planning and assessment?
In my opinion, those look good, because some of these projects have already gone through planning and assessment. They're already underway, or at least ready to go. So,
And I think that the city of Sheridan, they're updating their master plan for their water was in that range as well. I should relook at it, but
Okay.
which was the higher cost of some of the proposals that were planning based.
Right.
Yes. And that's how we created the different categories, was based on what we already knew that the jurisdictions were looking to do. Good.
Thanks. Commissioner Kula?
I just realized there's one thing too, and maybe it's just that the Treasury guidelines aren't going to allow it. Would the Palmer Creek Water District, or sorry, the Palmer Creek Irrigation District, would they be eligible under the current proposal? And if not, would they be eligible under the Treasury guidelines? They had submitted a request to us for the engineering and planning for a dam rehab.
Maybe not, because it's associated with the and that is not allowed.
Yeah.
You know, without having this, you know, really the specifics or a response to a solicitation, you know, with some of that, you know, I wouldn't discourage somebody from applying, but at the same time also having an understanding, you know, because I'm not really prepared to kind of speak to how the district's organized and how that's set up as far as permitting, or, you know, unlike some of the other districts, Cove Orchard, Buell, Red Prairie, I'm thinking of some of those other districts that are out there, that we wanted to make sure that this was available for those districts and not just municipal systems. So we have that language, and I think it's just not having the a full formal application process to kind of vet and look at the eligibility and how they fit into one of the definitions to compare that to the Treasury guidance. I think it'd be subject to further review.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, commissioners? All right, looks good. Appreciate the work on this. Are there any other comments regarding that portion of the ARPA funds? Okay, if not, we can move on. And what's next up? Do we have, I've got two, I don't know what order because I printed them out. The nonprofits or the childhood environments do we want to go to next? Whatever you have next on your screen, Ken.
I was just going to suggest, did I unmute? Yes. Whichever one. I pulled up the childcare. So how about I share that one next?
Absolutely. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at that. And again, Carrie, just for clarification, a lot of these were pretty much patterned after some of the requests we've gotten so far, just to include those in what the application process would entail.
And now,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
I would.
Go ahead, Ken.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that this one for the childcare looks a little different because we've gotten requests, but we also took a step back. And if you remember, under CARES Act funding, that the county provided some CARES Act funds to the CCO, shared a portion for work that the CCO was doing real specific to childcare. So we did take a step back because we realized we did get a few child care specific projects that probably could have fallen under the nonprofit or fallen under child care. So we tried to take a step back. And so this one's going to look a little bit different and probably require some more discussion. Sorry, Carrie.
No, that's fine. And yeah, I was just going to point out that this one is very different from the other two in that the suggestion would be to partner with the early learning program and because they have the expertise, they have the subject matter experts, they have all of the data, and that this would be an excellent opportunity to partner with them.
Okay, so you're just looking in terms of them being in on the discussion and on the awarding of the grants.
That they would administer them.
Okay.
So that the board would set up the parameters for the types of funding that they would like to authorize, the type of outcomes that they would like to see this money go towards. And then it would be the YCCO that would then develop the application. They would manage all of the applications that come in and also the selection criteria and award. So we would completely sub that out.
And that would be subject to the approval of the board, each one of those.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, we would not have to, in other words, they would do this without any additional administrative funding to do that work, based on the fact that we had already given them some money. This is going to be something they're just going to do, correct?
So that's actually one of the conversations. I have a conversation with them later this afternoon to see, they are doing similar projects for the city of Salem, for instance. And so to see what have they decided internally as their administrative overhead and what are they suggesting to charge. So they may have decided that they have some administrative costs they need to have subsidized. So we'll know that.
Okay, thank you. Ken, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this kind of falls, because this one, when I was looking at it, when you compare it to water and sewer infrastructure, we as the county are much more familiar with capital projects of that kind of nature when it comes in. But when it comes to childcare, that's not something that the county that we have a lot of expertise or an area that we spend a lot of time. And what we built into this is based on the discussions, because I know that the board really wanted to put an emphasis on capacity building for existing providers and programs. And the CCO is going to be in a much better place and have much more knowledge because they're going to have working relationships with a lot of these organizations already in place. So that was another reason. And I think, again, just looking at the administrative portion of it, we'll still have a certain element that we have to do. We're just adding an additional sub layer of how that reporting and overseeing these agreements and contracts and how the funds are rolled out. But, you know, I do look at, I think it's, I would recommend, you know, working with the CCO and, you know, in proceeding down this path.
Agreed. They have been, and again, the important part for me would be that they do have working relationships and knowledge of the programs in all of their partners. If you think about Lutheran, if you think about the Relief Nursery, if you think about Safe Families, all of that would be, they already know how those are set up. Commissioners, thoughts?
Chair, I will say that I think this is I think it's a good idea. It gets the workload off of our staff onto these folks. Chair, as you said, they know the players, they already work with everybody, including you know, in-home childcare providers and licensed childcare providers that are for-profit entities as well. So I think that that range, and when I sit in on meetings of Early Learning Hub, I'm amazed at that they can keep track of all the acronyms too at the same time. So there's this depth of knowledge that we don't need to recreate within our staffing community while still getting money out to the providers. Yeah. So I think this looks good so far.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Bershauer, thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. I know we had placed quite a bit of emphasis on childcare and opening up childcare options. It's interesting because during I listened in on the EDAC meeting yesterday. They're discussing economic development, but childcare obviously comes up as part of that discussion. And it's really difficult, I think, for employers to figure out how to solve the childcare issue. We talked about, you know, perhaps incentivizing businesses to have employer-based childcare, and that's complicated for so many different reasons. I believe it was the city of McMinnville, Heather Richards said that they did suspend some of the requirements or fees associated with expansion of existing childcare facilities, or if you want to open up a new one, and there just hasn't been any response to that. So, you know, I feel like if we really want to get this done quickly and we want to have an immediate impact, this is the best way to do it, because if you consider sort of outside of the box solutions, they're going to take a while to upload. And I feel like people just it's a big hurdle. So I would agree that this is the best way to get it done and have the deepest impact on the community. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And we also know that projects like Project Oasis, which really has been struggling to find a location, couldn't get that done in Newburgh for a variety of reasons. And we've already talked about those here. I think the city of Newburgh has some introspection to do regarding that. They're now looking at a location in McMinnville. So there again is another lost opportunity for employers, the big employers in Newburgh. So I think that hopefully that the early learning folks will be able to work with the cities that perhaps there might be some impediments there that they could smooth out. But yeah, I think this is a great idea. So thank you for this. Anything else, commissioners, before we move on to the next category?
No, I think if the board, if we'll continue to have the conversations, and like Carrie said, she's meeting with the CCO this afternoon. And, you know, we may, you know, depending on that meeting, there may be questions or discussions to come back. You know, I think the biggest thing is going to be, you know, is if the board's comfortable with the guardrails that, you know, that have been applied under this, that it's directing the funds, that we're making the funds available to the areas that the board would like to see, you know, the CCO, you know, make available and how they apply these funds. And I think that was, if you're okay with proceeding, then we can move on to the next category.
No, that looks good. Anybody else?
I agree, Chair.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our nonprofit investment in nonprofit organizations?
Okay, can everyone see this? I've learned my lessons. I make sure I ask, unlike the previous presentation to where I was scrolling and
Yes,
nobody
Ken.
else was seeing it. So,
Yes.
okay.
So the only thing I would like to say about this up front is that this is a more challenging category for a lot of reasons. It is very broad. In general terms, the ARPA funds that have been allocated to the county, the Treasury gives quite a lot of latitude as long as it fits under these broad categories. So there are nonprofits that are going to be responding to the behavioral health care, to the physical health care, to disparities, to economic disadvantaged groups. So it's quite broad in terms of the types of applications that we might receive.
As far as, thank you, Carrie. As far as what we're looking at, maybe at this point, the only thing we would need to talk about is the grant categories and the funding parameters. So does anybody have any thoughts on the nonprofit grant categories and what the dollar amounts are?
Chair, looking through the dollar amounts versus the total funding, I think that it's reasonable. It's not a lot of money for the great expanse of work that needs to happen and that could happen with this money. But I also recognize that the money that we put into it could be, the match for a much larger money, or it could be the thing that gets an organization to start a project that gets picked up by the state or the federal government or with internal.
And there are a number of them that are really relatively, low amounts. Some of the I think about remnant initiatives. I think about Love Inc. I think about the variety of smaller nonprofits who are doing some major work in the community that are really not asking for a lot of money. And it's been, I go back to remnant initiatives, and they were looking for some bridge money because they'd lost a grant and just wanted to get from July to January. We haven't been able to provide that, but it wasn't really even a lot of money. So I think a lot can be done with this money. I know we've got a lot of requests though.
That's a good point, Chair, that there are a number of very modest requests that will go a long way for some of these small to medium-sized organizations. So this gives them the flexibility to request for the things that they need.
Thank you. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. So capital grants, does someone have an example of what that might be?
Well, an example might be for a capital like a mission project. Maybe they have a capital project to, expand, make an investment into a building or build a new shelter or something along those lines.
Okay.
Another question about how we're going to get the word out. Will you just be contacting those folks who have made application or made letters of interest at this point, or will we do more of a broader request for applications?
I think we do a broader outreach. Our baseline is going to be to send an email to every individual or organization or business that has applied in the past through the online system. So we can send everybody a notice and say, you need to check online because these new opportunities are available. But then also to put together a plan for more targeted outreach. How do we reach each community fully and let them know?
And we would also have the groups that have already submitted, proposals to us over the last several months that, that we'd have direct contact with those organizations as well.
I know a lot of folks have been contacting the commissioners because everybody seems to think that it just, you sit down and you write a check. So a lot of people are really hoping for a quicker disbursement of these funds, and we need to make that clear. But one of the things I'm wondering is what our timeline is for getting information out to people so that we can at least let them know where we are at in the process.
Well, and I think this is the first step. That where we're at is reviewing some of the criteria and what the programs, now that the programs are actually starting to take shape and we have something on paper, and once the board is giving us the green light that they like what they're seeing here, this is the first step. Unfortunately, it's one of the challenges we have. I know there's a lot of need right now, but we also have to make sure on how we're soliciting projects, how we're awarding the funds, and then making sure that I can report back to Treasury that, how we're utilizing these funds and we've made these funds available. So I do recognize that sometimes it does take some time, but again, we're trying to ensure compliance with Treasury guidelines. And then also just trying to make sure there's sufficient time to get the word out there that folks can see it and they can prepare their applications and they can submit something. And really hoping it'll be a quick turnaround once we get actually defined timelines on the solicitation process, the review process, and award. So
there is a proposed timeline that's at the bottom of page 2 and on page 3. So this would be, in my estimation, this would be the fastest that this could happen, given all of the pieces. So, and this is the same for the water and sewer as well, that you would do the outreach and the development of the application and the selection committee decisions, and that you would open it up November 1st.
Yeah.
Give it 30 days. Then you have all of December to make for the selection committee to make its recommendations, for the board to approve those recommendations, and then to announce awards at the end of December and allow for disbursement in the first couple of weeks of January.
So just clarification, we would give people information, but the actual grant process would not be open until November 1st, but people would have some advance notice that this is happening.
Yep.
Correct. We would start that now and letting people know this is coming and there'll be more information, and then start putting the information up there.
So just roughly ballpark, are we looking at 2 weeks or a week to get information out to folks?
So we're at the end of September. I think within the next couple of weeks, within the next week, we'd be able to post and send an email out to the folks who have reached out to us initially and say, we have more information. We are opening up a fourth quarter grant program. Keep coming back to this. I mean, we can send them out multiple, but we could certainly send one out within the next week and let them know that this is coming.
Great. I think that will give people at least a timeline, and they can get started and start thinking about making an application. So do we need a vote, or is this just a consensus that we would just go ahead and move forward on these?
what I would probably do is, depending on if there's feedback, what we could do is take the discussion that we had today. I don't think it requires, an official board action if there's consensus to proceed with what's been proposed. What we could do is Carrie and I would take the feedback that we've received from the board, and then we would start working on that next process. And then we might, at a future meeting, if the board wants to do a final review on what the solicitation process is going to look like with the specific timelines and everything else, we could come back and the board could take action on that process and give it the approval notice to proceed.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for the work on this, Carrie and Ken. Appreciate getting to this point. We can move on then to department updates. We don't have any, and a consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
Chair, I'd move that we approve the consent agenda as presented. And I'm sorry, Commissioner Bershauer, I should really let you do some of the.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. On to old business. We have item H1, consideration of approval of item of amendment number 1 to the agreement between Yamhill County and Farline Bridge, Inc. per Board Order 20-25, amending services to include decommissioning, site restoration, and buyback for the Yamhellis West Sider Trail Phase 2 project in the amount of $35,168.32, retroactive to September 16th, 2021 through November 30th, 2021, and that's continued from September 16th. Christian, I believe you've had the opportunity to talk to all the commissioners about this because it was a very convoluted way to get to the bottom line and this bottom number. But thanks, Christian, for getting this on today.
Yeah, certainly. And if there are any other questions about how the final numbers came to be what they are, we're happy to chat about that. I was able to chat with Joey at Farline and clarify what he was trying to do in addressing concerns he was hearing from residents who lived nearby the bridge, and also reinforcing what he relayed to me, which was he's really interested in getting this work done. He wants to see the project come to a conclusion. It obviously, didn't end the way that they had anticipated, but he said they're not, used to leaving projects uncompleted. And now that it is clear that the project isn't going to move forward, he's anxious to complete the decommissioning process, both to wrap up the project and also to provide some closure to folks who live in the area. So we were able to clarify that the items that previously had said they might be moved to the county yard, it's clear now they're going to be moved to the contractor yard because that's part of the buyback with Farline. And we were able to remove one item of cost of $1,500 because the rail that's currently at the Farline yard is going to stay there. It's not going to actually move to the county yard. So that resulted in the net reduction of cost of $1,500. So what's before you now is the revised amendment for $106,500.
And the specifics of those and those items that have been changed in terms of the specific items that were changed over the last discussion have been outlined and itemized so that it's clear that those items have been changed.
Yes, I think the changes that he had proposed and that he and I have discussed are now reflected in the amendment that's before you.
Okay. Commissioners, thoughts on this? Nobody has any thoughts? Any questions?
I think I don't have any questions. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Bershauer.
Trying to hang 1 second. I was trying to pull it up.
I was going to say, Chair, that it's with the back and forth of the item, then the return of the item or the purchase of the item. It was good to put it off until this week, clearly, to get everybody on the same page with this.
Right, and thank you, Christian, for explaining it because it was not an easy item to dig through. Thank you for that, Commissioner Bershauer.
Chair, I think it looks good. The only thing I would say is that when they start to do this work, I would respectfully ask that we remind them to work very closely with the bus barn because we are in the middle of school. And so the buses will be coming and going consistently. And I know there was some tension there before. So I just want to make sure that we are good partners and proactive about making sure that we're keeping the bus company informed.
That's a good point. Thank you. All right. So do we have a motion to approve Amendment 1, item H1?
Chair, I would move approval of item H1.
We have a motion to approve. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. On to other business, and that is item I1, which is discussion of the Connect Oregon 6 grant, the Stag Hollow Bridge. Commissioners.
Well, I was going to say I'd love to hear from Ken.
Okay. Ken.
Yeah, so as far as this discussion item, again, we still have if you recall earlier this summer or spring, we got the notification from ODOT. It was requested that I send a letter to ODOT requesting an alternative repayment option. ODOT has since, they responded pretty quickly, and we haven't had a chance to have a discussion, but ODOT has been reaching out and asking about where we're at on the repayment of the grant, the Connect 6 grant. And so at this point, we haven't had a chance to have a further discussion about what the board wants to do next. And so that's kind of where we're at right now on next steps.
Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. Can you kind of refresh us on, I believe we went to them first and said, hey, you know, you participated in this, we think you should pay a portion of it. They said no. We went back and I believe we asked for something else, maybe a scheduled repayment. I can't remember exactly what we said, but can you kind of refresh our memory on that?
And Christian, feel free to jump in too and help me out, but if I miss something, but it was my recollection that we had meetings with ODOT. We had a lengthy discussion. The last thing that in looking at my records, there was the letter that the board directed me to send to ODOT, asking them to review on how much the county, you know, and like you were saying, the discussion around ODOT, you know, whether it's 100% or 50% of the grant funds. And ODOT sent us a lengthy response. In fact, that I think that came from Department of Justice, who representing ODOT, who sent that and respectfully declined. And they did present options as far as they would be open to, you know, installments, you know, payment installments up to, you know, 12 months. Or paying the lump sum, and that was the presentation that we were given from ODOT as our options. And I think we may have had a brief discussion, but I don't believe there's been any follow-up or feedback with ODOT. Christian, unless I'm missing something,
Well, that sounds right. That looks like the last communication that we had was at the end of May.
Yeah,
that's around the time we heard back from DOJ.
So as far as our response to their response, I think it could be argued that since they were well aware of the fact, and they even stated in emails that they were aware of the fact that this project would likely not go forward based on some of the challenges and all of the issues that had been ongoing. I'm wondering at what point we concede that, you know, okay, hold on, it's not all our fault. You were well aware of it. You knew this project wasn't going forward to go forward, likely based on your own statements and your own emails, that we just say, okay, you're right, and then end it there, or whether or not we can respond to them saying your emails make it clear that you knew this project couldn't go forward. And you knew that there were concerns about it. It wasn't a big surprise. So I'm just wondering what our options are in light of being able to make another response to their response.
You know, we certainly could, but much of what you just said was in our previous letter, where we made them aware of, you know, what they had been saying and the comments they had made, and their awareness of the outstanding issues and items that remained that still needed approval. So I think we covered that, you know, that they acknowledged, and we reminded them that they were aware of the fact that the conditional use permit approval was required, that there was organized opposition to the project, that LUBA had remanded it. They were aware of all of these things. And then despite that knowledge, they continued to support the project and our position on the project. And that even after asking for an amendment last year, after further conversation, they acquiesced, and we didn't actually end up executing that amendment, and that they were again in agreement with us moving forward as we had been. So we've described all of that to ODOT in the letter that they've now responded to. You know, we could make a similar argument again. But in their response, you know, they basically simply state that they feel that they are that they're entitled to recover from the county the entire grant amount.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate that. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Christian, is this the response that Ken just referred to, where he said they sent a lengthy response? Okay, can we get a copy of that? I'd be interested in seeing that. I don't know if we have had one.
Yeah, we saw that. I remember seeing that one. But yeah, it was lengthy. It was from the Department of Justice. It was an attorney who, I'm trying to think of his name.
Yeah, Sam Ziegler. It's
Yes.
a one-page. It's a one-page letter.
Yeah, and he addressed all those points.
Okay.
But it'd be good to get it to Commissioner too.
Sure.
Yeah, happy to do that.
So I guess my trouble with this is that we responded by saying, hey, you know, you knew this was a risky process and you participated anyway. Yeah. And their response was, well, but we told you back in June that, you know, you'd have to repay the money because you weren't receiving the conditional use permit for the bridge. And then they offered somewhat of a reconciliation to say, well, the county needs to sign an amendment, right? And then that never happened. So I guess I'm still unclear why the amendment never happened last year if we knew that we were going to have to pay this money back.
We didn't know at the time we were discussing the amendment that the money would need to be repaid. If I'm remembering right, and I apologize if I don't quite have my timeline or my recollection exact, but the request for the amendment came about after there was another remand from BUBA. And ODOT's primary goal with the amendment was to get some more specific timelines into the agreement about when the project was going to be completed. So we had some conversations, went back and forth with them to you know, try and help them understand the difficulty with providing specific timelines in the amendment because there were still these unknowns with the LUBA process. So what ended up being included in the final draft amendment that you're exactly right, never did get executed, were not hard and fast timelines for completion, but they were more aspirational goals, recognizing the fact that there were still a number of parts to the land use process that still hadn't been completed yet. So that's sort of where we ended with the amendment, and this was in November or December of last year.
Okay, yeah, I understand that part. I just don't understand why, even if they were aspirational, why the amendment wasn't signed by the county. Or was it that ODOT wasn't going to agree to aspirational?
No, I think based on the conversations I am recalling, they were okay with the amendment as it was finally drafted and agreed upon. I'm not remembering exactly why it was that in the end it was determined that we weren't going to go forward with the amendment.
Well, my recollection is that it took them, sorry, if I may, my recollection is that county staff, you know, drafted a proposal, sent it to ODOT, and then they didn't get back, I think they're signed and approved until sometime in December. I think there was like a 3-month period of time there where it was just sitting with ODOT.
Okay, I know we've had this discussion before many times about the trail, but it is very, very frustrating to be in the position that we're in right now, because in my view and what we've seen come out about the trail, the county knew as of June of last year that they were going to have to repay the grant. And ODOT specifically stated that the reason was because the bridge was for the trail, and it was supposed to be open to the public by a certain amount of time. And the county knew that ODOT wasn't happy, that they were going to terminate the agreement, and that repayment was going to be imminent. And it seems like there's a period of 6 months before I was even sworn in that the county didn't sign an amendment, even though there was some sort of agreement between us and ODOT that they would entertain an extension or an amendment. And that still wasn't signed by the time I was sworn in. And here we are, and we're having to repay the grant. And I think I've said this before, I think it's disingenuous to say that Commissioner Sterrett or myself are responsible for repayment of the grant. We had nothing to do, I specifically had nothing to do with this trail. And Commissioner Sterrett has repeatedly voted against the trail for a good, 5-6 years. So it's frustrating to be, it's very frustrating to be in this position. And I guess my question is, if ODOT's not willing to take responsibility for their role in it, what are our options going forward? I know they gave us 12 months or so. Does it make any sense for us to split the payment up into different fiscal years? I don't know if there would be any sort of advantage or common sense, strategy around that. But this is a terrible vote to have to make.
Thank
And
you.
Commissioner Bershauer, I do want to note that ODOT did, I'm not sure really why, but ODOT did not return the I think you call it the executed or the amendment that was ready for us until sometime in mid-December of, what was that, 2019? Or no, 2020. Yeah. And then I will note that the trigger then, the next move that ODOT made was when you declined to take up the remand, which made it clear that the bridge wasn't going anywhere.
But that doesn't quite make sense, Commissioner Kula, because the public records that we've posted on our website, on the county's website, show that the county hesitated to sign an amendment and instead tried to do an MOU. And when that was rejected by ODOT, then somebody sat on their hands and didn't submit a proposal for amendment for quite a while. So I don't know how long it took ODOT to respond to that, but there was a period of 3 or 4 months where the county was either unwilling to sign an amendment or tried to have a plan B, and it didn't work. So it's disingenuous to say that as well.
I'm just stating the facts, Commissioner. I don't actually know what you're talking about with an MOU versus an amendment. I do know that we waited for ODOT to return a signed amendment to us for our approval. But regardless, you chose not to go ahead with the remand, and that's what triggered ODOT to say, clearly, you're not moving forward with this project.
And I would counter that, Commissioner Kula, with you probably should go on our website and read the emails that were released to the public, because they very clearly state what happened. And ODOT, as of June of last year, was clear in their message to the county that if this bridge was not going to be open to the public by such and such a date, and you don't have land use approval, then we will be terminating the contract and you will owe it back. And I believe there was an email in there from you that stated in December of last year that you acknowledged that because the amendment wasn't signed, now we have to pay the bridge money back. So you cannot by any stretch of the imagination, place this on Commissioner Sterrett or myself. It's absolutely disingenuous.
And thank you, Commissioner. I'm aware of all the emails because obviously I wrote them with the understanding that they were a public record. Again, we're at this juncture right now because there wasn't an amendment signed because they got it to us too late. And then the amendment would have, if we had continued moving forward with the bridge, with the trail, with the remand, it would have held. And I recognize that you don't agree with that, but the fact of the matter is that you denied to take up the remand, and here we are now, and ODOT expects bridge repayment. And I do note that Ken did bring to us, and then we did approve moving money into a fund specifically for this. But I think that Commissioner Berschauer, that you make a reasonable point that I think is we should propose to ODOT of spreading the repayment over multiple fiscal years. I think that's a way to for our own county to have some level of risk management while still holding ourselves accountable for that.
Couple of thoughts about that. I want to go back to that MOU. I think that's significant, and I think it's material to the discussion that there was an effort made to go to ODOT and say, hey, here's a plan B. And that was not acceptable to ODOT because it was an acknowledgement, I believe, by the county that this faced significant concerns that would not be able to go forward. So as far as the repayment, I still believe that ODOT bears some responsibility in that, and whether or not we want to take that fight up and go back at them again and say, hey, but wait a second, guys, you just made it clear in your own emails that you knew this wasn't going to happen and that there were some concerns. So that being said, that perhaps that train has already left the station, but the other part about the repayment, I know that the money has been designated, and now the discussion is got to be, do we want to go to ODOT and say, hey, listen, what's the best that we can do as far as dragging this out? I know that they have come back at us and said, we kind of want to. We want to wrap this up, but I would suggest that we go back to them and give them a proposal, which would include a number of fiscal years, and perhaps we start with the uppermost level, and then we can come back and negotiate down to perhaps at least two. That's just doing the best that we can at this point. Christian, what are your thoughts about knowing what their tone was in the response to the letter that we got from the DOJ, and what their position is, and then also going back a couple of times to say in our proposal that we're going to suggest a number of fiscal years based on the fact that this is a significant amount of money.
Yeah, again, we've talked about what was in their response, and our proposal was that we divide the amount in half, and they've said no to that. One other thing that we might try and discuss with them, and Ken, I don't know if this has already been floated or not, but the grant was for the design of 3 bridges and the construction of 1. It was intended as a sort of single sort of overall project, but we did in fact have the 3 bridges designed, and that process was completed. I don't know if ODOT will be open to a suggestion that perhaps, their position could be that we did in fact satisfy those elements of the grant agreement by completing the design of those bridges, and therefore it wouldn't be necessary for them to hold us out of compliance with the grant because we arguably satisfied that part of the grant. We've thought about that approach before. We can float it with ODOT, but the concern in the past has been, like I said, this was designed as kind of an overall grant project with design and some construction, with the ultimate hope and goal that the bridge that was being built would be open to the public, and that clearly is not going to happen. So it's something we can mention to them. I don't hold out a great deal of hope that they will accept it, but I think an argument can be made that we did satisfy at least a portion of the grant. So we can try and have that conversation with ODOT, see if that leads to anything constructive. Otherwise, then I think it's indicated in their letter they're open to discussing repayment options and timelines. So I would say it would be good to come away from this meeting with a sense from the board on what sort of a timeline the board would be comfortable with, and then we can have that discussion with ODOT.
Thank you, Christian. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I've been thinking about that kind of all along, that component of there's the design for the 3 crossings, and that was at least presented at a commissioner meeting. Stare, it's so long ago, it feels like to me, but obviously not in your tenure. It wasn't so long ago. This is a deliverable towards a goal. So to me, that's how it was presented, is that if we have that will be a deliverable that we can that will be reimbursed from ODOT for, and we have that. We have those 3.
That's where Christian's negotiating skills will come in to play. If you wanted to sit down and talk about, well, when you make a contract with someone and you sign a contract with someone, and what did you deliver, what was still outstanding, the argument can be made. So I hit them with that.
And we can, and I think part of what I expect they'll come back with is whether or not they can, because this is money that I believe came from the federal government. If they can make that same argument to their upstream funders that the county did in fact meet the grant obligations to this extent, which is why they would then only be asking for a portion of the money back. It will depend on whether or not they can satisfy that obligation from their perspective, but it's certainly it's worth a conversation, I think.
As far as a board action today, would that be to direct staff to make that inquiry of ODOT and then come back at a future date and address that with a
yeah, I think we can do that. And then if the board would also like us to begin having conversations with ODOT about what a repayment timeline looks like, understanding that if possible, we'd like that to extend over, and this would be maybe where we could get some additional direction from the board, 1 or 2 or more fiscal years. That would help us know where to sort of start that part of the conversation with ODOT.
My recommendation would be is that we certainly don't start at the floor, that we go ahead and ask for it over the course of 3 fiscal years. And then if they will hopefully agree to 2, and we'll be able to, drag that out.
Okay.
Commissioners, thoughts on that? Commissioner Berschauer?
Chair, thank you. So Christian, do we have a dollar amount for the percentage of the grant that was applied to design? Because I'm assuming it was design of the Stag Hollow Bridge as well. So the 3 of them.
I think we do, but I don't have those numbers in front of me. I don't know.
And my recollection, Commissioner, is that it's a pretty significant amount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, based on, if you just look at what was specifically paid to our contractor or consultant who was doing that design work, that was $499,318. And right now, if my numbers are correct, I believe the outstanding amount that ODOT's requesting repayment on is $687,532.
Thanks.
Okay. So if I'm understanding Chair Starrett correctly, you are wanting to ask ODOT that, or tell ODOT that we have satisfied technically the grant agreement requirements for the design of the 3 bridges, which totals roughly $500,000. So we are requesting to only need to pay back the difference. Am I
That's what
tracking
I
that?
would have heard.
correct?
That was my proposal, or I would agree with what you just said. How about that?
Okay. Yeah,
And
I'm
is
fine
some
with
of-
that, with that direction.
Ken, is some of that total, was that all of the 494,000? Was that all funding from the Connect 6 grant, or was some of that funding from OPRD?
No, OPRD was strictly for construction.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So that was all Connect 6 expenditure.
And then, oh, Chair, sorry, you were about to say something.
No, I
then
was
have a
just gonna,
question after you.
I was just gonna say that if we were to, I didn't want to, I kind of wanted to decouple that where our request to them to just pay what the balance of that minus the 494, so that would be decoupled from our request to drag this out for multiple fiscal years, so that we have one request saying, this is what we're looking at, this is what we are proposing that we will pay you, and then let them come back, and then we can go ahead with the duration. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
let's have that conversation.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Oh, so I just wanted to get clarification from Ken, because the engineering firm that designed the structures, the crossings, also was the on-site kind of inspector, the third party, correct, for construction. So there's probably some money in there too. I don't want to confuse it too much, but there is money there.
There is, and I just wanted to give some ballpark numbers. You know, again, that was just an estimate based on what we paid Dell, but you're right, there was construction management also built into that amount that we paid for.
Okay, so does that require any kind of order other than it's just a direction to staff to come back with that and see what their response is, and then we can take some action when we figure out what their response is going to be?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think we'll go back and have some additional conversations with ODOT.
Okay, thank you. So we can move on to the public hearing if we are okay taking a 5-minute break before we do that.
I was going to ask you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We'll be right back. Okay, it looks like everybody is back. We'll go ahead and continue the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal sessions for September 23rd, 2021. At the point of our public hearing, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at item, hi Ken Friday, hi Colton, at the point of consideration of planning docket LOR 03-21, an appeal of the planning director's approval of a principal lot of record dwelling. The applicant is Don Williams and the tax lot is 3403-2700. The appellant Gregory and Donna Russell. So at this time, do we have any abstentions from members of the board? We have none. Any objections to the jurisdiction of the board to hear the matter before it? Okay, none. Does any board member need to announce and state on the record the substance of any ex parte contact? See any? All righty. Commissioner Kula, are you sure? Is there a rutabaga component in here that we're not?
I thought about adding a rutabaga component, but there actually are none, so I don't want to throw us off too much.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Appreciate your honesty.
Thank you though for bringing that up.
Didn't want to disappoint you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and if we could have Ken Friday go ahead and read the statements required by state law.
Yes, Oregon law requires that persons who attend a land use hearing be advised of certain rights and duties before the hearing begins. First, with regard to the standards for approval, state law ORS 197.763 sub 5 requires that we list the applicable substantive criteria that must be met for the county to approve the application. The standards will be listed by the planner in a few moments as part of the staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the standards for approval. Second, the raise it or waive it rule. Under Oregon law, any issue that might be raised in an appeal of the county's decision in this matter must be raised before the record of this hearing is closed. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board based on that issue. Third, and this is directed to the applicant, under ORS 197.796, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval, again, with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to this issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, I'll also note that under Oregon law, and because this is the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant, that is anyone who submits oral or written testimony during this hearing, may, before the record is closed, request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The request must be made prior to the time that the chair announces that the hearing is closed.
Thank you, Ken. And now we'll have a staff report. Desiree Lundeen. Hi, Desiree.
Good morning, commissioners. So the subject parcel is approximately 15 acres in size and is located within the exclusive farm use EF20 zoning district. Aerial imagery shows that the entire parcel is devoted to hay and grass seed farming and otherwise is undeveloped. The surrounding parcels to the west, north, and east are also located within the EF20 exclusive farm use district. To the south, parcels are zoned agriculture forestry small holding AF10. The area is predominantly dedicated to rural residential uses, but small scale farming uses in the form of fruit and nut tree orchards, vineyard, grass seed and hay production, and livestock pasturage exist throughout. The application's request is for approval of a lot of record dwelling. The request needs to be shown to be consistent with section 40203K, 40208, 40209, and 40210 of the Yamhill County zoning ordinance. Comprehensive plan policies may also be applicable. That concludes the staff report.
Thank you, Desiree. Ken? Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry about that. Since it's been years since we've had an appeal on a lot of record dwelling, I'd kind of like to give a little background on this type of application. This came about in the late 1980s and early 1990s when there was a lot of pressure from property owners who had owned property prior to the zoning, asking to be able to develop vacant lots with a home site. And at the same time, there were calls to raise the minimum lot size in the Willamette Valley from what we had as a 20 and 40 acre minimum to an 80 acre minimum. So in 1993, the Republicans and Democrats got together and negotiated House Bill 3661. And the bill required an 80 acre minimum lot size for farm and forest land, with some exceptions in the Willamette Valley, and allowed certain new dwelling approvals, specifically the forest template and lot of record dwellings. And the lot of record dwellings were specifically designed for property owners who owned their land prior to 1985. And the reason they picked that date is it's my understanding that that was the 1984 was the final time when all of the counties had their comprehensive plans acknowledged by the state. And there are several different tests for lot of record dwellings depending on the zoning and the soil on the property. So the higher the value of the soil, the more difficult to test. And I won't go into the specifics of this test. I think the applicant will probably do that in a few moments, but it's goal 3, or excuse me, it's class 3 soils. And by reading through the parameters, you can see that they wanted to allow a lot of record dwelling when it was a smaller acreage that bordered some other smaller lots that contained some development in the area. And a lot of records are what I think of as checklist planning. If a property and an ownership checks all the boxes, then you get the dwelling approval. Other aspects of the code, like the $80,000 gross sales requirement, doesn't apply. And I want to note that's been litigated. There have been a number of cases in the early 1990s related to a lot of record dwellings. And there was a 1994 case, Blundo versus Clackamas County, that found the county couldn't use other aspects of its comprehensive plan to deny a lot of record dwelling. So just with that background, that ends this portion of the staff report.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks very much. So do we have testimony in support of the application? I believe Mr. Walt Gowell is here, who is going to make that. Okay, we'll just wait. Here we go. So if you're with us, Walt, anytime you want to make testimony in support of the application, here we are.
I'm getting with you. It's they just allowed me to join, so
Sure, take your time. Good morning. Nice to see you. Welcome.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all. I am sitting here with Don Williams, the applicant, under this record, lot of record dwelling application. Don is has been a resident of Yamhill since 1948. He graduated from Yamhill Carlton High School in 1961. His father was the principal of Yamhill Carlton School District, or high school, I should say. He bought this property in 1978 with his wife, Ann, who passed away in 2020. They had always planned to build a home here and live here. It did not happen, but he's now planning to do so in conjunction with his son, Jay, and his wife, Julie. Let me just say that at the outset that we reviewed the staff report. We find that the findings in the staff report are accurate. They do connect the facts to the criteria and show how this application conforms to the criteria for a lot of record dwelling. The applicant also accepts and has no objection to the 4 conditions of approval set out in the staff and in the staff director's letter of approval. that is the subject of this appeal. I wanted to briefly go through the criteria before moving on to the appellant's responding to the appellant's specific objections. The property, the criteria require that the property be owned prior to 1985. Our client and his wife acquired this property in 1978. The record has been supplemented to show that this property was a discrete parcel as early as 1949 and probably before that. It does not, the criteria require that the property not include a dwelling, and this property is vacant property, and we concur with the appellant's letter to the effect that there has never been a dwelling on this property to our client's knowledge. Third, this property is not part of a tract. It's been a discrete parcel, and therefore the criteria relating to one home on a tract are not applicable. But for the purpose of the findings, the property is a discrete parcel, a separate parcel. Mr. Williams does not own any adjacent parcel or nearby parcel. Fifth, the property conforms and the application conforms to the comprehensive plan. We have indicated that this property is not within an urban growth boundary. It's not within an urban reserve. It's not within a 100-year floodplain or the Willamette River Greenway or an airport overlay district. It is within the EFU 20 zone, and the comprehensive plan provisions provide in that zone that this lot of record dwelling is a permitted use under section K of that provision. So we think it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the zoning designation, and the other comp plan policies that apply. Sixth, the property is required to be comprised predominantly of high value soils. We have provided a soils map and calculations to the county to show that this is in fact the case, that the Willackenzie soils on this property are predominantly about 87% class 3 soils, which qualify under this criteria and requirement. We supplied the county's soil map so that staff could confirm this designation. We also made reference to the NRCS map for the acreage calculations on some of the several Willamette soil designations for the property. Finally, the property must be bordered on 67% of its perimeter by properties that are less than 21 acres. In this case, we believe that's 100%. All the properties surrounding Mr. Williams' property are 21 acres or less. There has to have been at least 2 dwellings that were constructed prior to 1993, the adoption of the ordinance, and it may have been the statute that Ken was referencing in his introductory remarks. There are 3 at least, and those the information regarding when those were constructed is in the record on an email from the assessor's office to Mr. Williams' son, Jay Williams. So we believe that the criteria, which are fairly straightforward, have been met in this case, and that the ordinance itself is satisfied. Moving on to the objections that were filed by Mrs. Russell, in breaking down that single space 2-page letter, I came up with about 9 areas that I think are fairly discrete. So I want to address each one of those separately. The first objection was that the property did not have $80,000 a year of income for 2 years, as would have been required had this been an application under 40203A1 for a farm dwelling. It is not that type of application, and there is no income requirement. So we believe this objection is not valid. Second, the concern is that the site map for the access that was submitted with the application was construed as saying that the house would be built within 20 feet of the property line. And the concern was this would violate a 30-foot setback. The condition 1 of the approval requires that the applicant, if this residence is constructed, do comply with all setback requirements, and that is absolutely going to take place. If it's a 30-foot setback requirement, there'll be at least a 30-foot setback from the property line for the residence. I suspect it'll be far greater than that. The third objection really is an amalgam of several objections, is that the property has never had a dwelling on it. We agree with that. Second, that the county staff had indicated to the appellant that this property would never be developed, that there'd never been a house on it, it would never be developed. This must have occurred, or this perception must have occurred sometime prior to July of 2020, when the appellant took title to the property next door to Mr. Williams. We believe that that must have been a misunderstanding of county staff. Any basic due diligence on the part of the appellant prior to buying her property would have disclosed that there's 25 permitted uses and 19 conditionally approvable uses for the property that Mr. Williams owns, that there's any number of different proposed developments that would take place. And such a representation that no development would take place seems strange at best. With regard to the property being vacant, your criteria K2 requires that to be the case. So we concur that that is in fact the case. Finally, in that particular section, the appellant suggests that this property cannot be built as a replacement dwelling because there's no existing dwelling. And while that is in fact the case, that's true. This application is not for a replacement dwelling, it's for a lot of record dwelling, which does not require a pre-existing residence, and in fact says that no residence shall be there. So a replacement dwelling permit would be inapplicable. But we agree that this is not a replacement dwelling and can't be approved as such. Finally, in that section, the appellant indicates that there's no well on the property, there's no septic system on the property. That's true until such time as the county sanitarian approves the septic conditions and or a well is drilled that provides a satisfactory source of water. That will remain the case. Obviously, the applicant needs to be able to establish the source of water before investing in building a residence, and that so there a well is anticipated to be drilled this fall yet. If the approval for the dwelling becomes final, because the $20,000 estimated cost of drilling a well is not an investment that most people would want to make prior to knowing that they have the right to build a home to supply water out of that well too. The next objection that was made is that the well that's anticipated to be drilled would interfere with nearby properties. And while that is theoretically possible, well conflicts are a matter that are dealt with by the Oregon Water Resources Department, not by the Yamhill County. It's within the purview of the water master to deal with conflicting water claimants based on the Oregon's well-established prior doctrine of prior appropriation, which prefers earlier appropriators over later appropriators, as you're probably aware in the area of water rights. The only additional comment I would make with regard to a well is that the availability of water is not a criterion for county approval of a lot of record dwelling under your ordinance as it exists. The fifth objection might be called, we object to the use of our driveway for access. And while it is possible that the property, one of the two alternate access ways to the property would traverse an easement that is along the westerly boundary line of appellant and easterly boundary line of Mr. Williams. That easement is an existing established easement granted in 1961 to the predecessor in interest of Mr. Williams. And it is a lawful easement. It is an easement that is not limited in terms of the type of use that can be made of it. County policy recognizes easements as a source of valid access, but does impose upon those accesses the requirement for emergency vehicle standards. Those are included in condition number 1 of approval, so that the county can be assured that emergency vehicles can access any residence that is built using that easement area as a roadway. The applicant has used the easement roadway since acquiring the property in 1978 for accessing the northwest corner of his property. And I guess the only final thing I would say with regard to this objection is that it's not, I believe it's not appropriate for the appellant to request that the county nullify or modify the permissible uses of a lawful existing easement as a part of a land use proceeding. I think that goes beyond the scope of what they should be asking you to do. They have the ability to visit, discuss, and enter into road maintenance agreements with our client. Our client's made an offer in that regard, not received a response, but anticipates and is willing to contribute to appropriate costs of maintaining the commonly used driveway that is used to currently access the residents on the Russell property and also the residents to the north on the Bowman property. The 6th objection is that a residence would potentially shade the vineyard crop of Ms. Russell, and that this house shouldn't be allowed to be built because it might cause some shade to be cast upon some vines that would economically affect the neighbor. In Oregon, we do not have a right to require that our neighbors not develop their property in lawful ways because of the shade that might be cast. There are mechanisms to create easements that limit the ability of people to shade property. Those are voluntary agreements. They generally involve consideration. None has been requested here or suggested here. It is certainly not a criteria. I would only point out that if the property was planted with trees, which would be a lawful use on this property, and those trees grew to 120 feet tall, they would shade a vineyard next door, but the shading of that vineyard next door would not make those trees inappropriate or unlawful, and they would be a permitted use nonetheless. The 7th objection is that the building of a residence will devalue our property because it would impede our view zone. Oregon law does not create a view zone that properties have as respecting their neighbors. Again, easements can be negotiated, or reservations can be created if you sell a piece of property, limiting the height of a building that can be built in front of you or some such thing. Those are usually private arrangements. There's no Oregon statute, there's no county criteria or ordinance that would indicate that the approval of this application should not be approved because it might impede with the view of the appellant. The effect of a new residence next door on the property next door, the value of the property next door, which is another aspect of the objection, is also not a criteria under county ordinance. It's also quite speculative, and there's no indication or information that such would take place or has taken place. And even if it did take place, I don't believe it would bear on the criteria that are before you. The applicant has the next to the last thing is that the applicant has objected to the use of the roadway unless it's widened and paved. They would like it to be two lanes wide and paved, and have the applicant be required to do that. The comments I would make on this are just several. One, the county has well-established emergency vehicle standards that relate to the use of roads and access to private residences in the county. Those do not require paving, nor do they require 2 lanes, though they may require passing lanes every so often, I believe every 400 feet or so, in order to obtain the approval of the fire district or the fire chief. In this case, the current road is currently being used for access by 2 other residences, one of which is beyond the area where the house is anticipated to be built on Mr. Williams' property. ORS 105-175 has default provisions for the maintenance of roads, and those are in play and are enforceable as between co-users of an access easement. As I said before, our client has offered to enter into a maintenance agreement, but has not yet received a response. That offer remains open. Finally, and perhaps most interestingly enough, the final objection of the appellant is in the next to the last paragraph on her submittal. We object to any development of this EF20 parcel. And any is capitalized. So I think that really goes to the heart of the objection here, and that is that this party wants the property next door left vacant for their benefit. The EFU zoning for this property allows for, as I said, 36 potential permitted uses and 19 possible conditional uses, each of which are subject to compliance with applicable approval criteria. The appellant evidently expects Mr. Williams to maintain this property forever as vacant farmland, but offers no basis for why that should be the case, or no compensation for the loss of the development rights that would be caused by that. The house that's proposed for this property is anticipated to be built and occupied by Mr. Williams, his son and daughter-in-law. Mr. Williams lost his wife last year and is anticipating, and that his children are anticipating that they will want to be involved in the next stage of his life. And that's the reason why this application is coming forth at this time. And I think that that's all that we wanted to say at this juncture, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have or Mr. Williams may answer.
Thank you, Mr. Gowell, and thank you, Mr. Williams. Let's go ahead, and do we have any questions, commissioners, at this point for Mr. Gowell or Mr. Williams? Okay, no questions. Then do we have anyone from the appellant's case who'd like to make testimony? Okay. Okay. We do. And if you could state your name and address for the record, please. It looks like we have Mr. and Mrs. Russell joining us. Thank you. And again, if you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Greg Russell, 7900 Northeast Cooper Lane, Yamhill, Oregon.
Okay.
Donna.
And I'm his wife, Donna.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. All right. If you want to go ahead.
Personally, I had just 2 concerns when we raised this rebuttal. One was the previous conversations we had with the Planning Commission over the viability of the dwelling. And secondly, the concern about how close the offsets were on the building. Those were what my concerns were. In terms of the road maintenance, I'm happy to take up Mr. Williams' offer in terms of co-maintenance of the road. The The other concerns, I'll let Donna talk to, but that's just what I was concerned about for this. Donna,
Okay. I don't know how I put my video on. Oh, there we go. Oh, there I am. Well, I guess our concern was what the county had told us before we purchased this property a year ago. And that was, I didn't understand the difference between a lot of record compared to a farm dwelling. And I guess that the information that I was given in the letter was, if we don't object now to this, we can never object. So we objected because we were told that was the deadline we had to, meet. I think the information that the county sent explaining the lot of record makes a lot more sense now to me than what I thought was the farm dwelling requirement, which was what the county had laid out for me when I had discussed it with them last July before we purchased this property.
Thank you. Mr. Friday, do you want to go ahead? And there were a couple of issues that were raised. Thank you, Mrs. Russell. A couple of issues that were raised, and that has to do with a couple of points that Mr. Russell brought up. And so maybe we want to take them one by one.
sure.
As far as the, some sort of a guarantee that this couldn't be developed, if someone comes in.
I never asked for that. That's not me.
Okay. As far as, I guess, the setbacks are required to be maintained if there is a dwelling place on this property. So if I understood that was your second concern, then I think that has been addressed in the decision.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is the county approves the dwelling. I have absolutely no issue with them building as long as they meet the setback and I can have a working relationship with Mr. Williams on road maintenance. That's my position.
And it sounds like Mr. Williams is amenable to that. So, and that's not something that we get involved with. It's a civil agreement and one that we encourage neighbors to make. And so.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was water. There's a concrete water holding tank that's on the next lot to the west of Mr. Williams' property that holds the water that we purchase from a small water district out of Carlton. We are on that water system, and so are the Rayburns, which are just south of his property, south and east, just south of us. I don't know where the connection from that system comes either up the road or across his property or under the easement. I don't know where it comes into our house, but I am concerned about losing our water service and making sure that we're sensitive to where the water crosses his property or crosses the road or wherever it is, doesn't get damaged during the development of his property.
Ken, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I guess a water line crossing a property usually has an easement associated with it. And typically the property owners would be aware of where the water line is. It's really not something that we identify in a development approval as to where the water line is. That's something that's done more when they apply for the septic system and the site evaluation and the placement of that and the construction of the home. So, if you have information on where the water line is and want to provide that, we can put that in the file and make the applicant aware of it.
I don't have it, but I assume we can obtain it from the water company that we buy water from.
Ken, would that be something that would be added as a condition of approval?
No, typically not. I'd like to hear Walt Gal's take on it, but I think it's not in their interest to accidentally cut through a water line either. So I think they would do their best to make sure not to interrupt any sort of service that's already existing out there.
And the question remains about someone in the planning department indicating to the appellant that development would not be permitted. I know that was addressed here by Mr. Gall, but I'm just wondering if you wanted to make a comment from your department.
Well, if someone comes in and says, what do they have to do to get a farm dwelling on this property? We would say, it's high value soil. You'd have to grow, say, $80,000 income requirement. And they might go away thinking, oh, I've got a guarantee that nothing will ever happen on this property. And that's not the case. We just answered the question about what sort of farm dwelling obstacle you have for establishing something. There's many different approvals that someone could go for, but it depends on their ownership. It depends on if they've filed for a Measure 37 and have a Measure 49 approval. I don't know of any time in the last couple of decades that we've had someone that asked and we responded, oh yes, that, I guarantee you this can't be developed. I was counting up, I can think of 4 times where there's been major changes in state law over the last 30 years that has significantly affected development rights. And so it's just not something that we would say. It could be that, if someone could go away with the impression, well, they can't make the $80,000, they won't be able to develop it, but it's not something that we would guarantee, you can't develop a piece of property.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have questions of the appellants?
No, Chair, I do not. But I appreciate them coming and bringing their concerns, especially so that hopefully they get alleviated.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised this hasn't happened in a long time. So I guess we didn't really understand the process and the procedures on this whole thing.
We've seen, sorry to interrupt, we've seen a number of instances where the applicant and the appellant have come before the board and wound up figuring out a way to make everything work and walked out of there and wound up having nice, long friendships as a result of this. And I don't see why that wouldn't happen here, but do we have anyone else who wanted to do testimony in opposition to the application?
We had a couple of other neighbors that had logged in but had to leave because the meeting ran so late. So I don't know if they had, I don't know if anybody else submitted anything but in writing, but they had to go. So I don't have anything else.
I think they're just joining to hear what was happening.
Okay.
But I think they're neutral parties.
Thank you. Thank you. So then we'll go ahead and move on to public agency reports if there are no other questions. Desiree?
So we can drop.
You can leave.
But you can, yeah, if you want to, we'll go ahead and you can stay on and we'll just go ahead and go on to staff reports.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. You don't have to go away. Just you want to stay on and listen to the deliberations. Okay, go ahead, Desiree.
Yes, public agency reports. So staff reached out to referral agencies and did not receive any concerns or responses.
All right, do we want a rebuttal by the applicant? Mr. Gowell, Mr. Williams, did you want to rebut anything in the appellant's testimony?
Chair, I think they're coming back on.
All right, welcome back, Mr. Gowell, Mr. Williams.
Just a couple of comments. The Williamses are desirous of a positive relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Russell. If their water line crosses the Williams property, which we're unaware of, if that's the case, then we're more than willing to discuss how to deal with that. My guess is that the water line from Valley View Water District runs down the access road that they commonly use along the southerly boundary of Mr. Williams' property. That would be the logical place for it to have been installed. And so, but we're happy to receive any information and cooperate with the Russells to assure that the construction does not impede or impair their current water source, which is from Valley View Water.
Thank you.
Other than that, I think that the setbacks, Mr. Williams advises me that the setback will probably be considerably more than the 30 feet he understands the county requires. It may be, the house may be located more centrally into the property, but I believe it's going to be in the northeast quadrant of the property as in discussing it as a part of this process and application. I think that's all I need to add at this juncture. I appreciate the attention of the staff and the commission to this matter.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to a staff recommendation.
Yes, staff finds that with conditions, the applicant has satisfied the principal lot of record dwelling requirements outlined in sections 40203K, 40208, 40209, and 40210 of the Yamhill County zoning ordinance. For these reasons, staff recommends approval of the applicant's request for a lot of record dwelling on tax lot 3403-2800 with the conditions of approval listed in the staff report.
Thank you very much. So we will go ahead and close the hearing and begin deliberations. The hearing is closed. So commissioners, thoughts?
Chair, I believe that this meets the criteria, and I appreciate the appellants presenting a case and hearing from staff and from the applicant to dissuade some of the concerns.
Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would agree. I like how it has seemingly gone from fairly divisive in terms of the arguments to we can work together and live as friendly neighbors. So I am ready to approve.
All right. So go ahead if you would make a motion, Commissioner.
Oh, I need to pull up.
I can make a motion if you don't have it in front of you.
Okay, go
All
ahead.
right. Okay, so I would make a motion to approve or to deny the appeal of the planning director's approval of the principal lot of record dwelling on tax lot 3403-2800 and to uphold the planning director's approval. Any further discussion?
No, Chair.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooley, you froze up there.
I did, but I said no, Chair. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You said no.
No.
To what?
No further discussion.
Oh, well, we did a vote. Sorry, that's where you froze up. So I want to make sure. So we have a
Chair,
motion.
I vote with the majority.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the planning director's approval and deny the appeal. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The motion passes unanimously. So thank you all for being willing to work things out. I hope you have a long and happy relationship. Mr. Williams, I hope your home there is beautiful. And I want to thank staff for all the work that goes into this. And Christian.
Yeah, and I'm going to look to Ken here to sort of back me up. I think given that this is a fairly straightforward application and decision by the board, we can work with Mr. Gowell and have the written findings back in, say, 2 weeks.
Yes.
Would that be sufficient? Okay.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so we would plan to bring the written findings back before the board for approval in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you all
Thank you.
very much. Okay, we'll come back into session at the point of announcements. Commissioners, do you have announcements?
Chair, I just want to note that tomorrow I'll be meeting with a group around local funding and local match for the bypass again. So stay tuned. And hopefully what I'd like to do is at some point give you a further update that's in more detail about bypass conversations as they go along.
That would be great. Thank you. Ken?
Just wanted to remind the board that we had a scheduled executive session immediately following today's formal session. And that's going to be, you need to access that through the other link that went out.
Correct. Thank you for the reminder. Commissioner Bershauer, announcements.
None at this time, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple, but I'm going to save them because of our long time. I do want to say one final announcement is that Carolina Rook's birthday is tomorrow. So happy birthday to Carolina. And thank you for all the hard work that you do for us here at Yamhill County. Thank you. We appreciate your patience and all your dedication. So happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. So we'll go ahead and we will adjourn today's meeting, and then we'll come right back to an executive